nearby, or you can do it on a carpeted area. Might be a little more challenging on carpet, so you can do it with shoes on or shoes off. Either way, you'll challenge yourself. And today we're going to continue our Flex Focus series, focusing in on the hip. And so just a little descriptor about the hip joint, ball and socket. It should be allowed to move around and have a lot of motion. Usually what happens is our back ends up taking all of the forces that should be distributed through the hip, because the hip is maybe weak or it's not moving like it should. So you should have lots of mobility in that hip joint and have it nice and stretched out and strong so that your back doesn't have to do the work. Okay, so the break today is designed to give you movement, give you some stretching, dynamic movement, and then there's also a strengthening component to it. And then next week we'll focus on just honing in a little bit more on the hip joint strength. So we'll try to go slower today to go through the movements. So starting out, you can either do the test that we did last week where we came down to the floor to check our hip motion, or just in standing if you want to reach forward just to see how far you can actually reach towards your toes. See if you feel tight, if you're stopping here, and then you can recheck that when you're done. And if you need a reminder for that other test, it's just sitting down on the floor and rotating those hips from side to side, and then just feeling how the movement is in your hips, okay? So back up on your feet if you're not already there. And we are going to start with, let's start with the squats first, maybe. Yeah. Okay, so we always like to start with those, something to warm up. So you're gonna start with those squats, nice and easy with a press back through the arms, activating those triceps. Remember with those squats, I'm gonna turn to the side here, you are going to project your hips back as if you're going to sit down into an imaginary chair. And then once you're there, your knees are not going over your toes. And then you're pushing through your heels when you come back up, activating those posterior chain of muscles, your glutes, your hamstrings. So I am not leaning forward so that my knees are going over my toes. I'm going to lean back or hinge at the hip and sit down into my chair. Last week we did some of these where we dropped and stopped and you hold it. That's the strengthening piece again. Or you can stick with just the warm-up piece, or you can stop and drop, hold, and then push back up. That's the strengthening piece of this movement. Or you can just do the motion piece, wherever you are in this series. Okay? Now we're gonna go back to those lateral movements. That was your homework for the week, to move those hips laterally, okay? So I want you to think about, you're gonna think about shifting your zipper line over your big toe. So you shift, and it's almost like you're trying to, I'm gonna turn to the side here. So I'm shifting over and I'm trying to push my long bone into my back pocket. And then I can extend that opposite leg. So if you look at Jared, he's stretching that adductor on the other side, and you're holding that shift. That stretches this hip capsule, hip joint back here, and you can come out of that, and you can shift the other way. Okay, so think of like, you're gonna shift over, right over that hip, knee, ankle, all lined up. You can hold that as a stretch. And if you're squatted down, you should, and you're shifted over, you should feel some work even just in this position. So you can make this dynamic by shifting side to side. It's like you're skiing. If you've ever skied, You want to get back into your hip socket. Ski back way over. It's not just moving side to side, it's an actual shifting of that zipper line over to the big toe, and then shifting the zipper line the other direction. And be careful, your knee is not to go over your big toe, okay? So you're creating work just in this to make it a little bit more challenging. You can either stay here, moving side to side, or you shift over. You can make that leg active, work on your balance, work on strength, and then set it down. Shift back. This is really advanced. So this is if you can seat yourself in your hip socket. This is great for golfers to know how to shift their body weight into their hip.
That's why I'm so bad at golf.
And then being able to lift that opposite leg. Very challenging. Okay, so you don't have to get there. I just wanted to give you a challenge. Then you should feel warmed up. You're gonna walk out into a, go ahead, walk your hands out into a plank, then up to a down dog. So in down dog, so if you listen to my voice, this is gonna be the same as last week, but we're adding a spinal twist. Step your right foot to your right hand wide, and then rotate your spine to your right side. Eye gaze follows the hand up. You're gonna hold that. Nice stretch. And then when you return back to the middle, you're gonna swing that right leg back for three-legged dog. You'll bring it back through again and place it closer to the inside of your right hand for a lunge. You can lower that left knee to the mat, raising up and stretching the front of that hip. Now when you're in this position, you want to think about tucking your hip or your glute underneath you, and then you can lean in just a little bit, stretching the front of that thigh. So if you're okay here, then that's where you stay. If you want a little bit more work, tuck your toe, lift up into a lunge, and then you can just do tiny little pulses here, pressing off the front of that heel and pulsing with the back of the toes on the leg that's back. Maybe do 5 tiny pulses, then maybe you want to come back down into that stretch again. Again, tucking your tailbone under, stretching the front of your thigh. We're going to go through that sequence again, but we're going to change sides, okay? So this time you're going to focus on your left side. So pulling up, placing hands down, bringing that leg back into a three-legged dog, setting it down, setting up for the left side. You're going to step wide to the left hand and rotate. Rotating that spine, looking up towards your hand. You can either have your knee raised or down to the mat, whatever's comfortable for you. Coming back, you're gonna do a three-legged dog, swinging that left leg back, up, and through again into that lunge, setting your right knee down to the mat, stretching the front of that thigh. And remember, we want to tuck that hip under. And last week we also did a stretch up through the whole trunk. If you want to reach towards the sky, you sure can. Maybe do a little bit of side bend. And then back. And then you go ahead and take that leg. And if you want to raise up into that lunge, and again, it's those tiny little pulses for strength, balance, Should be feeling something.
Feel something.
Okay, if you're feeling a little burn, you can come back down. You can stretch that out again. If you need another stretch. From here, you'll take it back into three-legged dog, and then we will lower down to the mat from a plank. So swinging that leg through, setting it down, coming into a plank, pin those elbows to your side or your rib cage, lowering down, setting up for some work on this posterior chain, hip extension. If you bring arms out, we're gonna do swimmers. So tightening your right glute, keeping your legs straight, lift the right leg with the left arm, and then alternate. Left leg, right arm, and alternate. This is for hip extension, which is necessary when we're walking. We want that hip to be able to go through its full range of motion and extend back. It also is nice to open up that hip because of our seated postures throughout the day. And make sure that before you lift your leg, that you tighten the glute and use your glute to extend. These are called swimmers. And we're firing up the glutes. Now, if you want a little extra work, you could hold it in the air and talking to that glute, it's like work, 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 and then lowering. From this position, we're going to do just some hamstring curls, okay? So again, it's that posterior chain of muscles. So if you're down on your mat, you're gonna keep your knees fairly close together. And I just want you to bend your knee up as if you're gonna kick to the outside of your hip. And then alternate, kicking to the outside of your hip. Now you could bring it straight up like you're gonna kick yourself in the rear end, but I want you to direct your heel towards the outside. So if it's your left leg, direct that heel to your left hip. If it's the right side, direct the right heel to the right hip. This does a couple of things. Fires up the hamstrings, it flosses your femoral nerve, and it also will help let go of those hip flexors that tend to get very tight on us. So if you're sitting a lot and you feel like your hips are tight, you can even just get down into this position and do some hamstring curls to relax those hip flexors in the front. Okay, so if you're done with those hamstring curls, you can just come to a resting position and you can place your head down, turning your head one direction. Hopefully you got some good movement today in your hips, some good work through your hips. And you actually did almost 15 minutes of hard work. So that's good. Turning your head to the opposite direction for resting. Centering your mind for the day. Giving yourself credit for taking this time for yourself. Your homework for this week is going to be that lateral shifting exercise like you're skiing, okay? So that can be your homework for the week, or getting on your stomach and doing those hamstring curls to quiet down the front of the thighs. And if any of you have a hula hoop, I challenge you to go get a hula hoop and start working a hula hoop. It's a great way to gain hip mobility. And then next week, if you join us back here, we're going to focus in a little bit more on strength and isolating those muscles. So we'll do that next week. Thank you.
Thank you.